This is WMNF Tampa. Stay tuned for True Talk.
Hello, this is True Talk. Welcome to True Talk. This is WMNF 88.5 FM. This is your host, Samar Jarrah. My co-host, Ahmed Bedier, is traveling, and hopefully he's going to be joining us. We never run out of issues. We've been doing this show for the past 20 years or so. And every couple of weeks, unfortunately, there is something going on in the Arab world or the Muslim world or in the Middle East. As many of you have been following the news, there has been new developments in the Republic of Syria. Supposedly rebels who were previously associated with ISIS and associated with Al-Qaeda managed to enter into a city called Idlib, and from Idlib they moved to a city in the south called Hama, and from Hama they came very close to the capital of Syria, Damascus, and eventually they were able to enter into Damascus, and the former president is nowhere to be seen, Bashar al-Assad, who has been in power for a while, of course, following his dad. This dynasty of al-Assad ruled Syria for 50 years. He's nowhere to be seen in Damascus, but I think he fled, he and his family, to Russia. And he was probably given asylum there. So much to talk about. I'm hoping to be joined by someone who writes a lot about Syria, but I'm trying to reach him. But until we do, this is a summary of what has been going on. Of course, Syria is is a very important Arab nation. Parts of Syria are occupied by Israel. What is known as the Golan Heights have been occupied by Israel since the 1967 war. However, Israel annexed the area a few years ago, I think during the Trump administration, which is really illegal under international law. And Syria also was involved with Egypt in the 1967 war, 1973 war. But Syria did not sign any peace agreements with Israel, although the former president Bashar al-Assad was in secret negotiations with the state of Israel, but things didn't go well. And then, of course, with the Arab Spring, Syria went through its own Arab Spring. It was short lived. The brutality of the regime of al Assad was really, it just destroyed this attempt, the peaceful attempt by the people to overthrow the government or change its ways, was dealt with an iron fist. Unlike, for instance, how the Arab Spring went in Tunisia or in Egypt was more peaceful, and the crackdown was really different. I would say more smart. But when it comes to Syria, unfortunately, this was a very brutal system, ruled with a fist of iron. And I'm sure you are witnessing and watching so many videos and so many clips coming from Syria about the Sadnaya prison, which, by the way, I not visited the Sadnaya prison, but we went to the area called Sadnaya, which is Christian area and has a lot of Christian, ancient churches. And we passed by this prison. I remember we were in the taxi and the driver told us, please don't look. We were at least half a mile away from the building, and he said, please don't look at it. We said, we are in the taxi. We are very far away. He said, no, this is terrifying for me to be driving on this road. So please don't even look at it. This is how fearful people were of the regime of Bashar al-Assad and of that system, which collapsed in a few hours and a few days, which many people speculate that maybe there were foreign powers behind it. Maybe the US, the CIA, and Israel were maybe playing games behind the scenes. So much to talk about. I'm going to try and reach Richard one more time. So listen to this music break until I am able to talk, try to talk to Richard. If not, then we're going to be opening the phone lines and take your questions and comments if you have any. Again, this is True Talk on WMNF 88.5 FM. We're going to be taking a short break to try and reach Richard and get back to you. Okay, I'm back to WMNF. Richard will be joining us in about 10 minutes. There was an emergency going on with him. But as I was saying, the regime of Bashar al Assad fell apart. And what happened is that. There was almost a civil war going on in Syria after the failure of the Arab Spring there. So since 2011, there has been so many different nations involved in what is going on in Syria. We know that Hezbollah had a foothold there. Russia had a foothold there. The US, we already have troops. And if you have listened to any of the former President Trump, when he was talking about having troops there to secure oil fields and natural resources. So many countries were involved in what is going on in Syria, but the regime of Bashar al-Assad was able to withstand all that and stay in power until what took place a few days ago. So many different Arab countries have been supporting militant groups, some of them related to Al-Nusra, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. I'm sure you all are familiar with Al-Qaeda because of, their role in the September 11 attacks. Hezbollah has a foothold in Syria, Iran, Russia, as I mentioned, and of course, these other offshoots. Then all of a sudden, we started to hear about another breakaway of Al Qaeda known Hayat Tahrir al Sham, or I think the abbreviation is HTS, and they are the ones who launched a major offensive. They started from the north, as I mentioned, and they were able to go to Aleppo and then march into Hama and then march into the capital, Damascus. No army to be seen. The Syrian army is nowhere to be seen, and they were able to march into the capital. Also, of course, unfortunately, in the past 48 hours, Israel was able to bomb Syria endlessly, around 450 raids on every installation, military installation, naval installation, and also passport and intelligence and different buildings that housed a lot of files and archives and documentation. Some of them is governmental and some of it is non-governmental. So really, it is chaotic. Nobody knows how things will go, because we have seen what happened, for instance, in Libya. When NATO decided that it was time for Muammar al-Gaddafi to be overthrown, the day after was chaotic, and now we have almost two separate governments in Libya. We do not have a one united country, and we don't have any democratizations. People in democratization going on, people in the Arab world do not trust really foreign intervention, and they do not trust the West, I should say, because we meddle a lot, the West, in the affairs of the Arab countries. I personally believe that, unfortunately, the West is not interested in a free democratic process. They want a democratic process that ends with more stooges and more presidents who are tuned to the West more than they are tuned to their own people. Of course, so many people have died in Syria in the past 50 years, I should say. Not only since the rule of Bashar al-Assad, but also his father, Hafiz, who was a military commander and leader and ruled Syria with an iron fist. I'm still waiting for Richard to join me, but if anyone has something to say about what is going on in Syria or questions, you can send them to dj@wmnf.org, and you can call 813-239-9663, 813-239-9663. And also, I know that Gaza is on the back burner now of the news. Ahmed and I have been trying for the past year or so to talk about Gaza, to bring you voices, but really the genocide is still going on in Gaza. It has not stopped. Every day there are raids and there are blowing up of the north. In particular, famine is taking place, and it is cold now in the Arab world, and there is rain and no shelter. You have at least maybe 100,000 people are just living on the streets. So the situation in Gaza is still terrible. If our mainstream media is not covering it, it doesn't mean that things are not going bad there. So Ahmed and I have really covered that extensively, but we thought today we should be talking about Syria. And as I speak, I'm looking at the news now, but really, it is so depressing to be an Arab these days, because if you look at wherever there was an Arab Spring, it didn't work. Even in Tunisia, where there was a peaceful transition of power, yes, the Tunisian went to the streets and overthrew the president of Zain al-Abidin bin Ali, and they had free elections. They had al-Marzouqi, and then they had another president. The current president has clamped down on freedom of speech, and I know so many people in the West, they think that there is something wrong with the Arab world, that we are not people in the Arab world, like there's something in their culture where they cannot have democracy, but it is not really the case. The Arab world has been doomed by the geographic location. It's they control so many important waterways, the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf, the Mediterranean, the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb. Oil, plenty of oil, natural resources. So it has been really the victim of the struggle of foreign powers for so many years, but I would say for 100 years. And I hope you were listening to last week's show where we played the interview that I had conducted with Dr. Rashid Al-Khaldi, who was able to talk about the 100 years intervention. But I'm very happy to say that Richard is finally here with us. Good morning, Richard. I know it is so early in in Seattle. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning. Yes, it's a little bit early, but
I know, and I'm sure it is also called the Richard. I was telling our listeners that I am planning to talk to you because you write so much about Syria and the Arab world, but you also have a different way of looking at what is going on because of your background and your interest in the state of Israel. But let me just remind our listeners that this is True Talk on WMNF 88.5 FM. I'm talking to Richard Silverstein, and he is a writer for Tikum Ulam blog, very interesting blog that talks about the Arab world and the Middle East and Israel. You can, if you Google his name, you will find that he has been published in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, the Forward, the Seattle Times, and the Los Angeles Times, and he joins us today from Seattle. Richard, I was telling our listeners about what had happened in the past, let's say 48 hours or 72 hours of rebels, Islamist rebels, moving from Idlib to Hama to Syria. But before that, can you give them a summary or a brief of the Al-Assad family and dynasty, and how they influenced the region, and maybe start from there?
Sure. The Assad family has ruled Syria since around 1970. Bashar al-Assad, the recently deposed leader of Syria, his father took over control of Syria in that year, 1970. And then Assad, I think around 2000, he inherited, when his father died, he inherited the leadership of the country. And since 1970, the Assad family has had a brutal, cruel rule over Syria, in which they completely suppressed any freedom of speech or freedom of the press or any kinds of freedom that countries that have a democracy would recognize. And the Syrian people were deeply resentful of the methods that they used, the prisons that were full of dissidents and probably even people who hadn't done anything wrong, including, by the way, women, mothers with their children were inside this prison. And in 2011, the Sunni majority in Syria rebelled and began a civil war inside the country against Assad, who was a member of the Alawite sect, which is a Shia offshoot. So the minority, the Alawite minority, had control of much of the levers of power, and the Sunnis were basically shut out. And the Islamist movement that you mentioned, which has recently just toppled Assad, was they are Islamists. The ones who they are Sunni, the ones who took over the country and who are now in control. So this was a sectarian fight, but it really also was a fight on behalf of all of Syria to liberate it from Assad. And now, talking about the role that Bashar al-Assad played in the region itself, he was propped up by a combination of several powerful interests, including Russia and Hezbollah from Lebanon and Iran. They provided weapons. They provided military personnel, soldiers, to prop up Assad. And Russia had 2 military bases inside of Syria, and they also supplied firepower, air power, and naval power as well. That all of which kept Assad on the throne and in control. So when Putin became bogged down in Ukraine, Russia could no longer play an active role in Syria. And when Israel attacked both Hamas and later Hezbollah, it really decimated both of those two groups. And so Hezbollah, which most of its leadership had been assassinated by Israel, and also thousands of its fighters had been wounded critically in a cyber attack on their cell phone network. So Hezbollah could no longer play a role either. So Assad was then left to his own devices. Iran could not single-handedly prop him up. And that's what enabled the Islamists to mount their offensive from Idlib province, as you mentioned, and then move south to Damascus and take over the most of the country now. So that's the context in which all of this happened. And I wrote about how Israel's beginning with 10/7 and the Hamas attack on Israel, and then following Israel's genocide in Gaza, in which they've killed at least 50,000 people, probably much more. All of those incidents, all of the Israeli attacks on both Hamas and then later Hezbollah, are what enabled the Islamist opposition to take control. Because without Hezbollah, as I said, without Russia, without Iran, Assad was basically naked and had no power.
What about his army, Richard? I mean, they were not seen anywhere fighting. I mean, it's good because there is no bloodshed, but like, where is this army and all these powerful secret police that he unleashed on his own people?
Well, Syria, Assad faced international sanctions. So, and he had also lost the main revenue generator for his regime, which were the oil fields that the Kurdish forces in the northwest of the country, northeast of the country, had taken over the oil fields. So he had no revenue stream for which to arm his soldiers, and he couldn't even pay them more than $10 a month. And the officers in control of the lower level ranks of the army often stole the pay of the stole out $10 for themselves, and the officers only paid $30 a month. So the army really became a sort of a straw man kind of army with no will to fight and no loyalty to Assad, who wasn't paying them. So the army really, it evaporated as soon as there was any kind of resistance. And the collapse of the army is what really did Assad in and allowed them to take control.
So can you tell us a little bit about this person that we all of a sudden read his name on CNN and doing an interview with him, Abu Muhammad al-Julani? Like, I can't imagine CNN doing an interview with Khalid Mish'al, for instance, or Sinwar, but it's doing this interview with Abu Muhammad al-Julani. Who is this person?
Well, al-Julani is a wily figure who knows how to sort of manipulate the groups that he's has founded or been affiliated with. But in terms of his background, it's interesting that his grandfather actually lived in the Syrian Golan, which, by the way, we haven't talked about this, but Israel has essentially invaded Syria and taken over much of the Syrian Golan and called it a new buffer zone that has abrogated the 1974 armistice between Israel and Syria. And this invasion was taking over more of Syrian territory to so-called protection of Israel. But al-Julani's great grandfather had a home for the family in the Syrian Golan. And in 1967, during the war between Israel, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, they became exiles. And eventually his father moved to Saudi Arabia, where he became an oil engineer. And he was born in Syria, but the family returned to Syria. He returned to Syria And he began his career as an Islamist by founding the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. Eventually, he left Al-Qaeda and changed his affiliation. His group was called Al-Nusra. And as Al-Nusra, he and the group were actually proxies for Israel. And much of what they did was based in the Syrian Golan. And Israel provided al-Nusra with weapons and supplies, and also treated its wounded in Israeli hospitals. There's a very close relationship between Israel and al-Nusra. But then he changed his connection again, and his movement became called, the acronym is HTS. I'm not so good with Arabic pronunciation, so I'll just say that it was HTS. And he supposedly moderated himself, and instead of being an extreme Islamist fundamentalist, he claims that he moderated became more interested in I wouldn't say a free society, but at least one that wasn't as extreme and brutal in terms of enforcing Islamic fundamentalism of the variety that you see in ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And in that context, CNN decided to interview him, and he did this sort of PR charm offensive, talking about how much he's changed, how much he's matured. I think that remains to be seen. I think so far the developments in terms of how they have ruled in the days so far seem to be a good omen in terms of there being a little bit more freedom and a little bit more openness available to the population. And the population has reacted with great celebration enthusiasm to being free of Assad. But I think we have to wait and see in terms of what kind of rule al-Jilani will institute in Syria.
Thanks, Richard, for this interesting background. Some people say that he's been rebranded, and some people say that the way even he dresses and his fatigue reminds them of Zelensky, as if they are all part of this rebranding to sell to the West. And as you said, people, of course, are very happy to get rid of this brutal regime that was ruling Syria for 50 years. But at the same time, for an Islamist mentality to be bombed and to have 450 raids from Israel on your country that you just liberated from a tyranny, there was no comment, as far as I know, no condemnation, no commentary. I know people can say that, they're busy, they just overthrew a 50-year-old regime. But for an Islamist, that's not something that can happen easily with Israel. What do you think is going on? Is there more to read behind the scenes?
Well, I think it's interesting to note, as I said just now, that Israel has invaded Syria and occupies a good deal of territory. And instead of denouncing this, the world has welcomed it. This is sovereign Syrian territory that Israel has taken over. And by the way, the Israeli army says that it will not be withdrawing from this territory anytime soon. And I believe that this occupation is either permanent or it will take a long time before Israel is willing to relinquish it. And we should say in 1973, Israel took over the Syrian Golan, or at least a large part of it, and then annexed it. So there's a good deal of territory in 1973 they already have taken over, and now they've done further. And this basically turns Syria into a very weak state with minimal central control. especially after Assad has left. And it really remains to be seen at what kind of country will there be a strong central authority coming out of Damascus, as there's been since 1970 or earlier, or will it break down into a bunch of sectarian sort of areas in which you have the Kurds in the northeast, and you have Turkey has armed its own proxies in the north, and you have Israel in the south. So I think that Israel has played the role of basically destroying central control right now. And going back to what you just said, Israel sent 350 of its U.S.-made warplanes to bomb every military asset inside of Syria. They bombed the air defense systems that Assad got from Russia. They bombed chemical and biological weapons labs. They bombed airports. They bombed airplanes. They destroyed the Syrian Navy, etc. It was a comprehensive and thorough dismantling of any military capability. And without that, Syria has basically no ability to defend itself, and it leaves it open to any outside party, including Turkey, including Israel, to basically exert their own force and interests inside of Syria. So that's another factor to consider. What will al-Jilani be able to do when he does sort of try to just, structure whatever the government is going to be like in Syria? You have all these interests converging inside Syria, and it's going to be very, very difficult. And I should add that it's in Israel's interest for Syria to be a weak and divided state, because then it can't mount any kind of support for the Palestinians. So this development in Syria has also essentially, unfortunately, destroyed any ability for the Palestinian movement to advance its own interests. Israel has now emerged victorious and has eliminated Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia as players in the region and in Syria in particular. So this is really a bad omen for the Palestinians, and it remains to be seen what Syria will be when the dust clears here.
Let me just remind our listeners that they're listening to Mr. Richard Silverstein. He's a writer for Tikkun Olam, and he's been published in Haaretz and the Seattle Times and Los Angeles Times, and writes extensively about the Arab world and Israel. I want you, Richard, to maybe elaborate a little bit about the Kurds and Turkey's role. And like you just said now, that a weaker Syria is very important for Israel. But at the same time, what if there are clashes between the different armed religious Islamist groups? I mean, don't you think that it might be spilling over to Turkey? I mean, Syria has a very, very interesting geographic location other than the Golan Heights and Israel, but it also borders Iraq, it borders Turkey, it borders Jordan. And I would assume that the other countries are also having really anxiety, especially in Jordan, that if there is a civil war among these warring factions that are being supported by foreign powers, this could spill over to outside the borders of Syria.
Yes, you mentioned Jordan, and there's at least 1 million Syrian refugees inside Jordan along its border with Syria. There are a similar number that have taken refuge inside of Turkey. And by the way, 1/3 of the population of Syria are now refugees in various countries, including the ones I mentioned and elsewhere. Many of the Syrian refugees have fled and tried to enter enter Europe, and some of them have taken refuge in Germany and other European countries. So Turkey is probably the most powerful interest in Syria, and it has created its own buffer zone by taking over Syrian territory in the north. And the Kurds, who are allied with the U.S., which has nearly 1,000 soldiers inside of Syria, trying to suppress ISIS in eastern Syria. And so you have those three countries and entities which all have interests in what Syria will become. And the Kurds in northeastern Syria basically control all of the oil production that is happening in the country. And they're using the revenues in order to support themselves and their army, which has proven quite effective against ISIS and in advancing U.S. interests in Syria. So, and the Kurds have been at war with Turkey for decades. So there's a Kurd minority inside of Turkey, and it has advocated for autonomy within Turkey, which the Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, has violently suppressed. And the Kurds, there's a major Kurd population in Iraq as well as Turkey and in Syria. So the Kurds in Syria are quite powerful and have their own interests. And Syria, we should say, is quite a diverse country. 10% of Syria are Christians. Another 10% are Alawite, Shia Muslims. About 80%, I believe, are Sunni. And there's various other sort of ethnic groups and interests inside of Syria. So I think the Kurds are key players in terms of the U.S. support. And I wanted to just say one other thing about the U.S. And the fact that the Biden administration has welcomed Israeli intervention in Syria, and it has those interests interests in terms of supporting the Kurds. So we're playing a very major role intervening in Syria, as we have in many countries in the Middle East, including, Afghanistan is not in the Middle East, but we intervened there and fought against the Taliban, overthrew the Taliban. We fought and overthrew Saddam in Iraq, and now we're playing a similar role inside of Syria. And that is quite alarming if you are opposed to U.S. interventionism and the disastrous and harmful effects that it's had on the countries I just mentioned.
Yes, Richard, because, failed everywhere, failed in Iraq, failed in Afghanistan, failed in Iran when they overthrew the Mossadegh regime and brought to us the current system and the Islamic Revolution in Iran. So people really are very weary of any U.S. foreign intervention. What do you think of what Trump commented on what is going on in Syria? He, in a way, said that the U.S. is involved and that we should leave it, let it play out. What do you think? And what do you think when he comes to power? He will, of course, face the reality that his country is part of what is going on there, that he cannot just say things the way he says it now when he becomes the president at the White House. What do you think, Richard, is going to happen?
Well, the context of Trump's position on Syria goes back to his first term as president, when he said that he wanted to withdraw all U.S. troops in Syria. And he then had Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, who were generals themselves, and they persuaded him not to withdraw all the U.S. troops. They did withdraw some troops, and they left the 1,000 soldiers that I mentioned. Plus, there's air power, U.S. air power, that is covering those troops and protecting them. But Trump has again said during the campaign that he wants to withdraw U.S. troops. He generally takes an anti-interventionist and anti-war position, but that's basically his rhetoric. And as we know about Trump, he has a big mouth. He's full of a lot of hot air. So it remains to be seen what he will actually do when he becomes president. But it is possible that he will follow up on his promise and will withdraw those 1,000 troops. When that happens, that will open the door to, first of all, it will withdraw the only major supporter of the Kurds. And the Kurds could be left alone, and Turkey will possibly take over the territory of the Kurds and engage in a major sort of suppression of the Kurds in northeastern Syria. And it will also open the door to ISIS, which is in western Iraq and eastern Syria. And without the U.S. there, ISIS could sweep in and engage in a major conflict with al-Jilani and HTS. So this would really, withdrawing U.S. troops will have a domino effect. And it's really an open question about what will happen if we do withdraw. I think that it is, I would say it's a 50-50 chance that we withdraw. And if we stay, then maybe there'll be some more stability inside of Syria. If we leave, it really opens us up to a can of worms in terms of what will happen to Syria.
Do you know this person, Ahmed Jarrah, that is supposedly the prime minister now, the temporary person? I really have no background on him. Do you know anything about him? He's been like saying all the proper things, especially with like really specifying that there will be no imposing any Islamic law on anybody, especially minorities. And I think you have seen images, Richard, of these Islamists interacting with Christians in the streets and telling them you can go to the market and do this and that and celebrate Christmas very soon. But do you know anything about him? Because some Syrians who are extremely supportive of what happened, they're extremely happy that Bashar al-Assad is no longer the president. They were very alarmed to see that there was the Syrian flag, but also another Islamist flag next to it.
Yeah, the current prime minister is affiliated with the Syrian opposition. I have not read what specific affiliation that he has, but I believe it's likely that he's affiliated with HTS and that he was installed by al-Jilani as sort of the political representative of HTS and has basically, you know, I don't know if he's a figurehead and what kind of power he will exert, but certainly al-Jilani will really be the power behind the throne. The new prime minister basically will be executing the orders of al-Jilani, who's going to be the most powerful person in Syria, at least so far. So I think that as it assumes more control over Syria, that's when we're really going to see what his vision is for ruling Syria. Right now, he doesn't have full control. And so he has to project an image of moderation in order to be able to consolidate his power. But like many figures who became dictators in countries, we're talking about Fidel Castro and talking about some of the countries you mentioned, they all start out as quote unquote Democrats and sort of figures of trying to create unity within the country. But then when they've consolidated power, you see more of their true ideology and their true agenda for rule inside the country. And I'm not saying that al-Jilani will follow the same example, but I think we have so many examples of the ways in which dictators have come to power and then really exerted suppressed individual rights and the ability of people to speak freely, and that's the path that many of them have taken. So I think that's something we need to watch to see whether he follows that model or whether he creates a Syria that is more open and more free.
Richard, I know we have something like 6 or 7 minutes, and you write and observe the Middle East. What do you think could happen in Lebanon? You had mentioned how Israel was successful in really eliminating so many leaders of the Hezbollah, and again with what happened in Syria. What do you think is going to happen in Lebanon? And then I want to really give a few minutes to Gaza.
Lebanon is a very sad case. It's basically now a failed state. As your listeners will know, it's a state that has three different groups inside it: Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, and Christians. And they, prior to the past few decades, there was a sort of a tripartite system in Syria that ruled the country, and all of that has basically been destroyed because Hezbollah represented the Shias in Lebanon, and with the destruction of Hezbollah, essentially, it controlled about 30% of the political authority inside the country. It was the most powerful political factor inside of Lebanon, and it had basically its own independent army, aside from the Lebanese army, which was quite weak. So Hezbollah is really sort of caught back on its heels, and many of its fighters are incapacitated, wounded, as I mentioned. And Israel has conducted a sweeping genocide in Lebanon, as similar to what it's done in Gaza. So it's been attacking southern Lebanon, and most of the villages, the Shia villages in southern Lebanon, are empty of all of their population, and at least 100,000 Lebanese in the south are refugees themselves. So, and before this, Lebanon was a state that was completely dysfunctional. So, it's just a total disaster and a total mess, Lebanon is. And that's another factor that will play into Syria, because Lebanon and Syria have a shared border. And you believe it or not, you have Lebanese fleeing Lebanon into Syria. Well, this was before the Islamist offensive. That's how bad things were in Lebanon when they fled to Syria. You're going to probably have another wave of hundreds of thousands of refugees leaving either Lebanon or leaving Syria when they realize how bad things are. And this may impact Europe as well, because we had a crisis of Syrian refugees leaving after 2011 and the civil war starting. So we could see this again, and that would destabilize Europe to an extent, because you have right-wing figures leading Hungary and Poland who are anti-immigrant, and that just caused an enormous amount of instability inside of Europe.
And very briefly, Richard, Gaza, do you think we're going to be seeing any ceasefire anytime soon before maybe Trump is inaugurated?
Well, I just read yesterday that Hamas has moderated its demands about a ceasefire and has agreed to an Israeli presence. Its demand before that had been to have the Israeli army evacuate the entire north of Gaza, and now supposedly it has agreed to an Israeli military presence. The problem with that is that Israel will occupy Gaza for the indefinite future. So Gaza will essentially become not annexed to Israel probably, but it will be fully occupied by the Israeli army for an indefinite period. And we're going to see Israeli influence inside of Gaza. The north is completely destroyed, and population in the north is largely refugees. So we're going to see possibly Jewish settlements inside of Gaza. That's what the right-wing settler movement wants to do. So Gaza is going to be really a hopeless, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say this, but it's going to be quite a hopeless situation for the Palestinians.
So
And
sad, Richard. But Richard, thank you so much.